What's up, guys? Today we are talking about lesson 1.5, adding and subtracting rational numbers. So this is pretty similar to the last two sections we do, except instead of working with integers, today we're working with rational numbers. All right, so to start off, we're going to go ahead with an exercise. So we want to demonstrate using additive inverses how to subtract these integers. I'm going to give you about a minute or so to do this yourself, and then I'm going to solve through it with you. All right, so that probably wasn't a minute, but if you guys aren't done, you can always pause the video. All right, so we're starting with 2 minus 6. So 2 minus 6 can be rewritten using additive inverses as 2 plus negative 6, right? And then we know that 2 plus negative 6 would be equal to negative 4, because that is the difference in these total values right here, and also because we have the larger negative sign, the larger value with the negative sign, then that negative sign will continue on. Then looking at negative 1 minus 3. We can rewrite that as negative 1 plus negative 3. You know that would also be negative 4 because negative 1 plus negative 3 is 4. And then finally 4 minus 1. We can rewrite that as 4 plus negative 1, and that would sum to 3. Awesome. Hope you guys were able to get those. All right, so going on to some examples. For starters, we want to look at 1 1/2 minus 2 1/2. So you guys could notice that while doing this, we could simply subtract the integers and then also add to them their fractional components here, which is 1/2 minus 1/2. Now that's one way you could work through this problem, and then you'd see you get negative 1 plus 0, which is equal to negative 1. Or we could work through it as combining them to make mixed numbers. Now this is what you should probably do more often because it's really rare that those fractions will cancel out like that. So if we have 1 1/2 minus 2 1/2, we can rewrite this as 3/2 minus 5/2. When we're working on that there, we can work this into becoming an additive inverse and change it as 3/2 plus negative 5/2. And then this would equal negative 2 over 2, which would equal to negative 1. Let's see here that this would be negative 1. All right, now looking at negative 2.5 minus 5 6/10. Now this is a little interesting here because we have a fraction and a decimal. So that means that we're going to have to convert one of those into the same form that the other one is. So just for reference, it's always going to be easier to change a fraction to a decimal than it is a decimal to a fraction. So we're starting with negative 2.5. We're going to keep that. And I'm going to change this using our additive inverses to that. Okay. Now, we're going to convert 6/10 to a decimal. Now, from other lessons, you can remember that we can do this during long division, or we can just remember that 6/10 would be 0.6 in decimal form. So this would be negative 2.5 plus negative 5.6. And then when we solve those together, we would get a negative 8.1. And that would be the answer to that one right there. All right, so moving on to some more examples. So we want to find negative 135.4 plus 78 1/2. So again, this is another instance where we're going to have to convert that 1/2 to a decimal. All right, so this would be equal to negative 135.4 plus 78.5, because 1/2 is equal to 0.5 in decimal form. When we do our math there, we can see that we are subtracting 135.4 and 78.5, and then since the 135.4 is the larger value, we're going to keep that negative sign. And then we know that the difference between these two values is 56.9. And we know that's the difference just from solving it out. So if I were to write down here 135.4 minus 78.5, get a 9 there. This becomes a 4. We get a 6 here. This becomes a 2. And we would get a 5 here. And then you could clearly see that 135.4 and 78.5 would become 59.6. Awesome. Going on to our fifth problem right here, I believe. So Gwen says that the sum of negative 1 3/4 and 2 1/2 is the same as the difference between 2 1/2 and 1 3/4. Is this correct? Explain. All right, well, let's start looking at negative 1 3/4 and 2 2/2 as a sum. So we have negative 1 3/4 plus 2 1/2. Now let's remember, when we're working with sums, the order does not matter due to the commutative property. However, when we are working with the difference, like we will be right here, the order will matter. Okay, so that is our first equation. I'm going to mark that with a little a. Now b, we're going to look at 2 1/2 minus 1 3/4. Now, why is it 2 1/2 minus 1 3/4? Well, like we said before, the order in the difference matters, and that is the order that is given us. Alrighty, so are these two equations the same? Well, let's think about it. In our first one right here, we have a 2 1/2, a positive 2 1/2. We have that in both equations, right? And then also in both occasions, we have a negative 1 3/4. Negative 1 3/4. Alrighty, so would these values be the same? Well, if we have the same values in both equations, but the order is changed, then yes, they would be the same. And if it might make it a little bit easier, we can substitute this with its additive inverse. Oops. This would be 1 3/4. It's negative. And you see here that we have that negative 1 3/4 in both equations, and we have that positive 2 1/2 in both equations. So is this correct? Yes. Same values in both equations. Alrighty, let's go on to our next problem here. So the temp in a town is 36.6 degrees during the day and negative 12.6 degrees at night. And we want to find the change in temp from day to night. So for starters, I'm going to draw a little number line here. We're going to put 36.6 degrees right here. We'll make our 0 right here. And then we also want to have that negative 12.6 degrees. So if we think about it, at the day, we are starting at 36.6 degrees. So we're going to start over here. And by the nighttime, we're going to be at negative 12.6 degrees. So what it's asking us to find is this total change in temp right here, from 36.6 all the way down to negative 12.6. So let's write that out. So we're trying to find from 36.6 to negative 12.6. Well, if we're looking at the change in temp, we can just sum those two numbers together there. Because we're looking at this whole value right here, and this would be equal to 36.6. This value right here would be equal to 12.6, because that's the units in each measurement. Alrighty, so then when we're summing that here, we would get a sum of 49.2. So we know that the temp change from day to night was equal to 49.2 degrees. Alrighty, and then our final example. So the roots of a plant reach down 3 3/4 inches below the ground. How many inches is the plant above the ground, assuming the total length of the plant is 12.5 inches? So to start off, I'd like to draw a picture on this one. So I'm going to make a little flower right here. You guys can make fun of my drawings all you want, but they get the job done. So we have our little flower. Even give it a little leaf there. We got some roots going into the ground right here. All right. So it's told us that the roots reach 3 3/4 inches below the ground. Let me erase that there. It's kind of messy. All right, so our roots are reaching 3 3/4 inches below the ground. And then the total height of our plant is 12.5 inches. So what do we want to find out? Well, we want to find out this area right here, the part that is not below the ground, but above the ground. So if we look at that, that's this whole total length of the plant minus those little roots that are below the ground. So we're going to have to set up our equation to be 12.5 minus 3 3/4. Alrighty, so now we can see here that we're going to need to convert these into the same numbers right here, or the same value. So we're going to get 12.5 minus 3.75. Alrighty, then we're just subtracting that right there, so that's not too easy. We can change this to our additive inverse. Okay, so 12.5 minus 3.75. So we get a 5 right here, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Get a 7 right here. make that a 1. So how many times does 3 go into 11? 3, 8 times, right? So our total value would be 8.75. Or our flower is 8.75 inches above the ground. Alrighty. Alrighty, so now some practice problems. So we want to find 3.2 minus negative 5.7. We want to find 12/13 minus 1/13. And finally, we want to find negative 50 and 1/2 plus 12.3. Alrighty, guys, hope you're able to solve those and look forward to seeing you guys in class soon. Bye-bye.